There's not going to be a diminishment in the need to run cities in ever more complicated ways. There's not going to be a diminishment in what it takes to run interstate highway systems or space transportation systems or things that exist in the future. What there is a need for, though, is the modernization of all of these educational realms so that they're not singularly focused on just the forces of government. We need people that are trained more broadly in economics, in innovation, in entrepreneurship, in problem solving, in multi-sector teaming, all these kinds of things. And so it's just another moment for another drive towards modernization.
Welcome to Management Matters. I'm James Christian Blockwood. This week's episode is all about reimagining how we prepare the next generation of public servants that can build a government that's more responsive, effective, efficient, transparent, and accountable. As the demands on public institutions grow more complex, so too must the skills, mindsets, and systems that support them. We're joined by two exceptional leaders who are helping shape that future. Michael Crow is the president of Arizona State University and a nationally recognized leader in innovation in higher education. Martha Bohrt is the Interim Executive Director of the Network of Schools of Public Policy, Affairs, and Administration, an advocate for modernizing government to be more agile, inclusive, and citizen-centered. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
We're almost 7 months into the new administration. Set the stage for our listeners and tell us, how has the current administration and policies shaped academia? What changes have you noticed in the last 6 months? Michael, maybe we can start with you.
James Christian, what I would say is that, we're a government of the people have spoken, and the new president has come in his second term and has said, I don't believe the universities are doing what the country needs to be doing. I believe that there's a disconnection. I believe that we're underserving the population. This is, what we hear. I think that there are, a number of issues that have been brought up. And so I'm of the view that what we have is a period now of significant opportunity to re-look at our relationship with the people, and the president and the administration and the Congress have sort of set that up as an opportunity using all the powers that they have available to them, which is, are we serving enough people? Are we helping enough people? Are we helping the economy to grow and to compete, or are lagging growth rates something that are partly derivative of us? And so it's been a tumultuous 7 months, with lots of status quo pasts now gone, business practices of the past now changed, new ways of thinking now being driven forward. And so as all the other periods of dramatic change in the U.S., think about the emergence of the civil service, think about Woodrow Wilson's dissertation on congressional government, moving away from the notion of committees being so empowered, et cetera, et cetera. We're at another moment with a strongly focused executive, where the universities need to figure out how we can be of greater service to the country. And I guess what I would say is that we've had a 80-year unbelievable run of service to the United States. But at the end of that run, it doesn't mean we have to keep running in the same way. We have to find ways to educate more efficiently, educate more effectively, impact more people. Half the people that have gone to college in the United States have no diploma. Half the people that have taken Pell Grants have no degree. Half the people with student debts have no degree. Most of the people with student debt have no degree. What is that? And so it's time to sit back and say, okay, we got a tornado going on here. Let's make some changes.
Martha, you just heard Michael talk about the people who have spoken and that there's opportunity ahead. What's your view?
There's a lot of conversations about rethinking and really paying attention to some of the things that were on autopilot for a few years. So for NASPAA, we have over 300 members in 28 countries. And so, yes, definitely in the U.S., the things that we're seeing change is that our members in D.C. are heavily impacted. Their alumni networks are having difficulty retaining or finding jobs. But the same is true for all of the universities that place students in D.C., whether it's through internships or, even new hires wanting to come to D.C. So that's definitely different, something that we hadn't seen in a long time. But one of the things, and I wonder if Michael agrees with me here, I think that some of the things that make the headlines and that are happening are new at the federal level, but not necessarily at the state level. So there's definitely things that we have been monitoring for years. And higher education in the United States is so much a state level issue, right? That we definitely had seen and could anticipate some of the things that were coming at the federal level, because that's really being fed by a lot of the things we had happening at the state level, right?
Yeah. So, our country is really 50 laboratories of democracy with a few major cities being additional laboratories of democracy. Phoenix is different than Los Angeles, different than Salt Lake City, different than New York City, different than Boston. And so what we've got going on is we've got this notion of how the people's interests are going to be served now being implemented in many different ways. So all these changes, there's nothing new on the table. There's nothing new in the arguments that are being made. Should you invest more? Should you invest less? I think the one thing that we might be suffering from, and I went to one of the NASPAA schools. I'm a graduate of the Maxwell School, and we run our School of Public Affairs here at ASU. So very big public administration, public policy school. And so what we have to figure out is in the people that we're training, there's not going to be any diminishment of the need for public sector executives. There's not going to be a diminishment in the need to run cities in ever more complicated ways. There's not going to be a diminishment in what it takes to run interstate highway systems or space transportation systems or things that exist in the future. What there is a need for, though, is the modernization of all of these educational realms so that they're not singularly focused on just the forces of government. We need people that are trained more broadly in economics, in innovation, in entrepreneurship, in problem solving, in multi-sector teaming, all these kinds of things. And so it's just another moment for another drive towards modernization. And the states have been doing this.
And I think that the added piece here also is, and we get this a lot at NASPAA, being that we represent so many countries. When it comes to innovation, we have to think about the student skills, the student placement, and even the USAID cuts have heavily impacted our members outside of the US. So I think the change, even though we're seeing it really fast paced here in the States, it's really a global change, a global need for innovation. And so that'll be really interesting to see where we are next year.
So we were a big USAID contractor. We had all of our contracts were canceled. So now we're talking with others, innovating, adjusting, adapting, trying to make things work. It's just, in some ways we need to modernize all of our logic. How do we use market forces to solve as many problems as we possibly can, leaving then non-market tools, non-market mechanisms to solve only those things that the market cannot solve. So if you take a thing like affordable housing, it is highly likely that market forces need to be engaged more than they have been, as opposed to just building with public resources housing, because those projects haven't been optimum in a lot of ways. And so I'm just a big arguer for, let's just take this moment to rethink everything and regroup and advance in new ways.
If there's no diminished need and nothing new has really occurred, or is at least being asked of right now, why does it feel so dramatic and why does it feel so disruptive?
Yeah, because we take the things that we learned and we turn them into religions. And then we become pietistic relative to the way of doing things. We have a 1% growth rate, 2% growth rate in the economy. We haven't seen 4% growth since the 1960s on a consistent basis. We have the bottom third of family incomes and personal income in the United States are now a group of individuals, 115 million in number for 345 million total Americans, for which there are no positive indicators. Educational attainment is going down, income is going down, health outcomes are going down. We have a system which is not as effective as perhaps we wish that it could be, and we're not doing enough to change things. So the reason that it sounds so dramatic is that people are attacking the system and people are defending the system as if it's a religion. It's not. This is a democracy. This is a place where you got to listen to what the people need in new ways, and the people want new things.
And I think the added piece to that is also going back to the original comments we were making. Maybe it was happening at the state level and like in your group, right? And now at the federal level, we're seeing it get a lot more attention. And so that's why I think it feels so ominous, right? Oh, it's happening everywhere, right? But the other thing that I would add to that, many times we were the example and didn't have to imagine new things. And so even though nothing is necessarily absolutely new, we do have to use our imaginations now to envision a different path forward, whether it's through the ways that Michael is describing or others, right? And so I think that being pushed to look outward is something new for our stakeholders. And so I believe those two pieces add to it for how big it feels.
So in the spirit of that, I just looked up just to make sure I remember the title. So if you look at Ezra Klein's new book on abundance, if you look at some other things that he's been writing, if you look at how he's been evolving his thinking, he spends in some of his recent work, recent articles and recent writings, a serious analysis of all things California. Let's just look at the issue of homelessness. What is it about all of these problems that become intractable? Why does it cost $800,000 to build an apartment for the unhoused? And in somewhere else, it costs $200,000. And it's not just the difference in the building requirements. Or why does it take 15 years to get a permit for something that's going to solve some sort of problem where people are using legal systems to slow up all things that they don't believe in? And so we need to take a serious look at how we solve problems in real time, how we address problems in real time. We need to take a serious look at how we help facilitate things. And so I think it's a perfect moment for a rethinking. So the reason that everybody's all panicking is that their minds aren't open. So they're panicking because they're afraid the system's being blown up, as opposed to, why don't we use this moment to fix all the things that aren't working? The panic would be, am I up to that task? Or am I just a simple bureaucrat implementing the rules that I was handed?
Well, let's open those minds. I mean, we're talking about changes in culture and government and technology. What are the most urgent needs that will help prepare people for a future career and a future impact that they can have on society? And what is the role that schools should be playing in that?
Well, one of the most urgent needs is we need access to learning modules by any person in the society, period. You should be able to go to college easily whenever you need, at any point in your life. You should be able to take high school courses, college courses, training courses, professional courses, anything that you need whenever you need it. So we haven't built a universally accessible learning environment, creating a thing much more important than the idea that people used to talk about, universal income. We don't need universal income. We need universal learning. We need people with access to whatever it takes to help them to become adaptive to the changes, to help them to drive the life forward that we need. And what we have now are rigid, structured institutions who don't think universal in the concept of their connection to the rest of society. They think sequestered or secluded or selective. They don't think universal.
I do see certain skills as having to be continued, but also strengthened and maybe adapted, right? And I think that strong ethical foundations continues to be something that we need our students to have, right? The civic responsibility aspect of public servants, I do believe, need to continue to be emphasized in public service degrees. And these are things that, regardless of the subject matter or the situation that the graduate is facing, they will need, right? You have strong ethics, sense of civic responsibility, the greater good, what we're all about in public service degrees. That continues to be top of mind for preparing our students. Now, the other thing is that being adaptable. I think that the world is moving at a way faster pace. As Michael was saying, sometimes we were used to hearing from public servants, and there's this idea of red tape, that there's a lot of that in their day-to-day work. But today's issues many times are urgent in the sense that you have to quickly adapt and really understand all of the players. So the idea of systems thinking is another piece that I believe public service degrees shouldn't be thinking, as you were explaining, Michael, kind of like in your silo, in your group, and how can others help me solve this, or how can others be involved both in the solution or the problem? And the last piece of that for me is that I think we think a lot about the skills that the students need, but I think we also need to think about the skills that the professors need. So I think that these technological changes, the access to information, social media, all of these things are so important and such an intrinsic part of what our students are living day to day. And I would really like to see a focus on preparing our professors to be able to adapt to the needs of the new generations in the classroom, right? Because that's the only time we have with them. So I think that for me, those three things are important to consider.
I want to take each of those that Martha put on the table. I think those were great points. And so let's just start with ethics. So what we don't realize is if people think that ethics is all about telling the truth, well, of course you need to tell the truth or you're unethical. Of course you need to play by the rules or you're unethical. But also if you can't provide a solution for an unhoused person to find a place to live outside of the rain and the snow, that is also unethical. And most of our society would agree with that. So we perpetuate unethical outcomes by being incapable of moving towards solutions and solving problems. And so we need a broader conceptualization of ethics on the issue of systems thinking. That's our breakdown. We've compartmentalized everything into small little niches and small little problems, or there's parks departments, or there's highway departments, or there's this, or someone else is worrying about air quality and somebody else is worrying about economic development. Well, they're all related. They're all completely intertwined, which then goes back to Martha's third point, which is the professoriate. So if you want the world to be like what it was, you should keep producing professors that look like the professors when I was in graduate school, and the world will be exactly the same. In areas related to the future, which public service, public administration is about, it's about solving problems for the future. All of the faculty must be empowered to be transdisciplinary. They must all be empowered to understand how to solve problems. They all must be empowered to not just run the government, but to attack the government, to go after those things that aren't working in a new kind of model, a new kind of design sense. We need all of those things. I thought those were great points, Martha.
So you're both talking about making sure students and educators are equipped with the right skills, values, tools, and that we have the technology to really help change this right now. But how are people learning differently? I mean, especially some of our younger folks, what does that look like for them, and how should schools be responding?
Well, I mean, we should be using every tool, every AI tool. Every public official is responsible in a sense for the lives of thousands or millions of people. They're making decisions or implementing decisions that affect lots of people. And so in doing that, one needs every tool imaginable, needs a way to look at every alternative, needs to be driving against deadlines. And so we need to be teaching how to use every tool, decision-making tools, decision enhancement tools, ways to make better decisions, ways to evaluate your decisions, ways to understand when you made a bad decision, how to recover. We need people to understand what a non-decision means. I'll keep harping on housing for the homeless or the unhoused. The impact on that across the entire society is unbelievable and is growing exponentially with each year that we don't solve these problems. And so there's no accountability. So we also need to find ways in our educational system to hold public sector executives and public sector workers in some realm of understanding and responsibility for those things that are done and those things that aren't done.
And I think to add to that, one of the things that we've been reflecting a lot on is, again, we hear, well, students are learning differently. The part of the conversation that I think needs to also happen is what they value now is different. How they communicate also is different, right? How they engage with information is different. And those are all part of learning, right? But again, I go back to my point that we need to prepare our professors adequately. And I wonder, one of the things that I've been grappling with, and I would love to hear Michael's thoughts on this too, but it's the idea of experiential learning. Setting up students for success prior to graduation can also set up the field for success, right? Because if you have somebody who has faced the consequences of making decisions or non-decisions, I think it would be useful as a supervisor, as someone that is hiring young people and working with them. I think that experiential learning, the idea of putting people in stressful situations, all of these things are part of how our students are now learning, how they're communicating, and even how they're retaining, and as attention spans change as well.
I think that's an important point. So if you look at what it takes to actually produce a physician, or what it takes to produce an Air Force or Marine Corps officer, you're trained, you're educated, and then you go into a period of after training through practice. Then after that, you go into then incremental steps into your advancement. And so what we need is more experience-based learning, more opportunities for people to learn. I've always thought that we should engage the training of people in public administration schools at very high levels of problems with lots of people involved, and then an evaluation like grand rounds after medical experiences where you come in and you say, well, here's the decisions that you made. We need to look at good decisions, bad decisions. We need to dissect what went right, what went wrong. If you read Robert Caro's book, The Power Broker, about the way that New York City got built, and you look at that as an autopsy of public administration decision-making over many, many decades, the life of Robert Moses, it's an unbelievably powerful thing. It should be a part of all instruction. But even on a narrower case, we should be using case studies, case analysis, and then actually having MPAs and MPPs involved in decision-making, and then the dissection of decision-making, the way the military looks at, well, we have gaming for this, and we didn't win this battle, and this didn't go right. And the way doctors look at what went right, what went wrong. But people are afraid to do that in a public sense because they're afraid of the political consequences of the understanding of bad decision-making. And so we have to get past that. We have to understand that the only way to get to better decision-making is to understand bad decision-making.
You're describing an outcome that I believe we would all want. But I want to go back to something I believe, Michael, I heard you say, which was around accountability. And how do you get accountability? Martha, does accreditation equal accountability, or is there something different?
I would say that accountability is part of accreditation, but I think that the main takeaway of accreditation addresses some of the concerns that Michael was talking about in terms of innovation and having systems for evaluation, right? You can do lots of things, but if you don't evaluate them and you don't understand whether they're working or not, then that's all you're going to do, be doing things for the sake of doing them. And so for me, that's the most important component of accreditation, making sure you have systems in place to understand is what you're doing working. And if it's not, let's move on and find the solution or find another way to address what's happening. Anytime I talk to a program that goes through accreditation, what I keep hearing is we professors regularly have an opportunity to sit down and spend 3 days just talking about program evaluation. And so when you bring in a process like NASPAA or other accreditors that allow faculty to do that, to sit down and say, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? Is it in alignment with the mission? Is it working? Is it not working? I think that portion of reflecting about what you're doing and making sure that it's working is the most important takeaway for accreditation.
What I would say is that all of that is necessary but insufficient. We need accreditation. We need accountability measures. But what we also need is we need to understand that we should have unbelievably rigorous lifelong education for public officials implementing the will of the people. What I mean by that, like the military, as they evolve individuals to become, a major, you can't just go from being a lieutenant to a major. You have to go to the field officer school. You have to go to a other additional school. Then you have to go to the Command and General Staff College. Then after you've gone to the Command and General Staff College, you have to go to specialty schools and then special schools and special training. And so if we had, I don't want to call it more military, but more rigorous accountability through training and measurement and so forth, I just think that would benefit everyone. If you look at what they've been able to do in Singapore, the level of training of the public officials there, which we haven't been able to do in the United States because there's still this denigration of the government, denigration of public service to some extent. We just haven't brought it into the sense of, if you want these things to be achieved, you need executives that can help make those things happen. They need to be unbelievably well trained, unbelievably well accredited, unbelievably well monitored. So there shouldn't be just like you got your MPA from a great public affairs school. Well, do you have your command badge or your problem solving badge or this or this? We need a lot more things. And then you're not going to get the job building the new airport in, Boston or what have you, unless you have achieved these kinds of things.
Michael, my last question to you, what is the one policy change that you would recommend to ensure that we have the best public administrators or best public servants to serve the people going forward?
Start thinking about what market salaries are for the outcomes that are desired. So you want to end homelessness, or, you want to do that, and you hire a public sector executive to work with the private sector to make this happen. And that public sector executive makes $120,000 a year, and the people working in the real estate companies that they're working with as executives make $2 million a year. It just doesn't work. You want to get the best talent. You don't want to pay exactly the market price for everything, but what you want is you want the best possible people. So my own view is that we need to move away from the notion that, and you hear a lot of this right now in the way that government employees are not doing anything. They don't deserve any salaries. They don't even deserve to work. I mean, it's the completely opposite attitude of what we need. We need to make it a desirous thing. And so you've got to look at these compensation models.
Martha, my last question to you. Why would a student going into a university or a graduate school want to study public administration, and what inspiring words would you have for them to help them see that as their path forward?
As an MPP, MPA graduate myself, I grappled with this question when I went to grad school. So what is it that I want to take on? And I mean, we all know this, the competition of the MPA, MPP is sometimes the MBA, right? And at least that was one of the main competitors when I was looking at grad schools. Law school is another one. And I think that one thing we cannot deny is that the students that go into these programs are still very mission driven. And so if you are somebody looking to make a difference, this is still the right path for you, right? Even though there's a discourse that may be attacking some of the happenings in government, we know that we have dedicated, committed, talented experts in government. I know that for me, the thing that kind of pushed me over the edge to a public service degree was when somebody came to talk to one of the info events that I had. And he said, oh, every day I walk through my street and I see that the trash is being picked up like every Tuesday. And I'm like, yes, I'm helping make that happen. I was like, that is so corny, right? But ultimately, this is true. You can see the real impact of what you're doing. And I think that to people, right, you're definitely seeing the direct impact to your community. And those things can really make a difference. However, I also do think that we need to rethink how public servants get compensated, because you can only go on idealism so long. But if you're looking to make a change, a direct change, a visible change, public services for you, absolutely.
This has been a phenomenal conversation, and 3 things are very clear to me. When you're talking about the future of education, in particular for our public administrators, you're also talking about the future of our society. You're also talking about a whole of society response and changes that are needed to make sure we get the right outcomes. And you're talking about the opportunity that we all have ahead to shape the path that we want to take. So I want to thank our 2 guests for a very good conversation and very good insights. Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Martha.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Management Matters is a presentation of the National Academy of Public Administration, produced by Lizzie, Alwan, and Matt Hampton, and edited by Matt Hampton.